صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما عظم الله لكم الأجر بضرب مولانا علي بن أبي طالب. قال الله تعالى في القرآن الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن شر الدواب عند الله الصم البكم الذين لا يعقلون. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In recent years, the way researchers would look at the causes of a human being's death has evolved. You'll see prior to the 1990s, researchers would simply look at physiological causes to the death of the human being. Causes such as heart attack, disease, cancer, lung infection, pneumonia. You'll see subsequent to the 1990s, researchers came forward and began to take social causes that led the human being towards death. And they realized that some of the social causes that led the human being to death, some of them were as powerful as physiological causes such as heart attack, diseases, cancer, AIDS, and diseases of such nature. One of the social factors that they found that led to the death of human beings, just as those physiological causes I mentioned, is the disease of poverty. They realized that in the year 2000 alone, nearly 39,000 people would die because of individual level poverty, and 172,000 died because of area level poverty. Meaning simply within the year 2000, you had nearly 172,000 people who were led to their death because of the cause of poverty. And that's why, if you're to do a comparison between the deaths caused by terrorism and the deaths caused by poverty, you'll see the real terrorist isn't Al-Qaeda or Wahhabism. The true terrorist is the disease of poverty. They come and tell us that since the year 2000, 7,500 people have died because of terrorists, yet 200 million have died because of poverty. That's why you'll see this claim holds a much more powerful weight to it when you begin to take into consideration the problems instigated by poverty. You see, because the problem isn't only poverty, it's the problems that poverty tends to cause. Number one, you'll see poverty is an instigation towards world hunger. Statistics come and tell us that nearly 8 million people die yearly because of world hunger. Why? Because they don't have the money to buy the food to stay alive. Number one, you see world hunger, in essence, is caused by poverty. Number two, you'll see a number of preventable diseases could be prevented were it not for the poverty-stricken areas who don't have the money to buy the medicine that they're needed to cure their diseases. A statistic that breaks the heart comes and tells us that 15,000 people die yearly. Sorry, wrong, incorrect. 15,000 people die daily in Africa because of tuberculosis, because of cancer, because of AIDS. Why? Because of a lack of money that they have to buy the medicine that allows them to cure the disease that they have. 15,000 people daily because of what? Poverty. Number three, you'll see poverty is the foundation of terrorism. You see, a lot of times we tend to attack terrorism, but we fail to realize what's the stem of terrorism. Terrorism may be the egg, but the nest is poverty. Terrorism is the egg, but the nest is poverty. That's why you'll see the 9/11 attackers may have been wealthy Saudis, but they found succor and sanctuary in the poverty-stricken Afghanistan. That's why you'll see American Secretary of State by the name of Colin Powell once made a very powerful statement which shows to us how poverty is the cause of terrorism. Colin Powell once said the war against terror is bound up in the war against poverty. Meaning if you remove poverty, in essence you just weakened terrorism. Number 4, you'll see poverty is an expose to our apathetic nature as human beings. You see, when you look at the situation in the world and the reaction of man towards the poverty in places like Africa, you realize how apathetic man truly is. You'll see Jeffrey D. Sachs made a very powerful statement in his foreword, in his book, The End of Poverty, Economic Possibilities of Our Time. In his foreword, he came and made a very powerful statement. He says 15,000 people dying in Africa daily is their crisis. That it's not mentioned on the nightly news is our crisis. 15,000 dying in Africa, we have nothing to do with that. That's their problem. That it's not mentioned on CNN, Fox News, CNBC is our crisis. You'll see a dog dies in Wisconsin, 5-hour report because of the dog. You'll see 15,000 people die daily in Africa. People who they're not normal humans. Mothers, fathers, children, workers, mechanics, engineers, people who have a life, people who have a history, people who have emotions die. You're lucky if you hear a word in regards to those people. And that's why you'll see when you look at the attack, the vicious attack of Ahl Bayt on the disease of poverty, you realize how strong of a disease it is. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, for example, comes and says, لو كان الفقر رجلا لقتلته. He says, if poverty was a man, I would have killed him. If poverty was manifested in human, I would kill him. Furthermore, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen mentions in Durar al-Hikam wa Ghurar al-Kilam, he comes and he says, Al-qabru khayrun min al-faqr. Listen to the words of our Imam. Imam, don't speak from vain. No, he's giving you medicine. He's giving you the essence of the disease of poverty. He says, Al-qabru khayrun min al-faqr. He says the grave is better than poverty. And that's why you'll see, do I disagree that poverty is a very strong issue in the world today? No, I don't disagree. Yet financial poverty is only one form of poverty, and neither is it the most severe. You see, poverty, if I want to understand the definition of that term, I don't refer to Webster's dictionary. I refer to the Gnostics who had true knowledge of things. That when Allah comes and refers to Ahl Bayt within the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, verse number 7, He says, هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات وأخر متشابهات فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم. Allah, when he refers to Ahl Bayt, He refers to them as what? The ones deeply rooted in knowledge. راسخون في العلم. Meaning, if I want to understand the term poverty's definition, not in human logic, but in divine logic, I have to refer to Al-Muhammad. So because today you can look at things from two perspectives. You can look at something from a human logic, or you can look at it from divine logic. When you look at Ahl Bayt, they make it very clear that they don't live their lives by human logic. They live not by societal standards, but by divine standards. Musa alayhi salam splits the sea with a stick, because he's following divine logic, not human logic. Jesus alayhi salam has the ability to resurrect the dead to life, as mentioned in the book of John, chapter 11, verse number 40. He would go into a funeral, he would see Lazarus. They would tell him, oh Jesus, could you help us? The majority would say, Jesus can't do anything, he's dead. Instantly, Jesus would say, remove the rock from the tomb of Lazarus. They would remove the rock. Instantly, Jesus would place his hand on the head of Lazarus. Lazarus would come back to life. A lady by Martha, she would come to him, she would tell him, Jesus, how did you do this? He would instantly reply, book of John, chapter 11, verse number 40. He would say, if thou believes in God, anything is possible. Jesus alayhi salam, what is he saying? He's saying, you Martha are a victim of human logic, whereas I'm a master because I follow divine logic. Rasulullah goes into Badr with a ratio of 1 to 3, and he comes out victorious, not because he's following human logic, because he's following divine logic, where Allah comes and says, In tansurullah yansurkum. If you give victory to Allah, Allah will give victory to you. Imam Abu Abdullah al-Hussein going in Karbala 72 verses 30,000, not because he's following human logic, because he's following divine logic. Furthermore, you'll see Amir al-Mu'mineen, when they brought to him Ibn Muljim, Abdurrahman ibn Muljim, may Allah curse that wretched human being. They would bring Abdurrahman to Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. After he was struck, he's there laying on the ground in the masjid of Kufa with his blessed beard soaking with the blood of his head. the first thing he would say to Abdul Rahman was what? He would say, loosen the rope from the hand of Abdul Rahman. I feel as if it's hurting him. He would say, bring a cup of milk to Abdul Rahman. I feel his thirst. Imam, he just killed you. He just struck you on the head. He says, no, I don't take things personal. You see, Umar ibn Sa'ad may have killed Abu Abdullah for personal reasons. You see, when Shimr was sitting on the chest of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, they have a discussion. He would tell him, Ya Shimr, ألا تعرفني? Do you not know me? He would tell him, نعم أعرفك أنت الحسين ibn Fatima bint Muhammad. He would say, you are Hussein, son of Fatima, daughter of Muhammad. He would then say, if you know me, why do you want to kill me? He said, بغضا من أبيك علي ibn Abi Talib. Because of the hatred I have towards your father. Notice, it's a personal vengeance. Imams don't do things for personal reasons. They do things because Allah tells them to do it. Even the love that the Prophet had towards Fatima wasn't personal love. It wasn't because she was his daughter. He would go to the house of Fatima for 6 months. He would knock on the door. He would say, Assalamu alaykum ya ahl bayt al-nubuwwah. وموضع الرسالة ومختلف الملائكة أتأذنون لمحمد للدخول. He would say, peace be upon you, O the house of prophethood, O the reception of revelation, O the attraction of angels. Do you allow Muhammad to enter your house? Fatima would come out. She would tell him, Aba al-bayt baytuk wal-hurra bintuk. She would tell him, Father, the house is your house, and the daughter is your daughter. Why do you come and speak to me in such a formal fashion? Just come and tell me, Fatima, open the door. He would say, no, it's not me that commands myself to speak in such a way. Allah has commanded me to speak to you in such a way. Meaning it wasn't personal love, it was divine love. Therefore, you'll see, for Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen to do such things to Abdul Rahman isn't surprising, because he doesn't hate Abdul Rahman, he hates the evil within Abdul Rahman. See, too many times we hate the enemy. You should hate the enemy, hate the enmity. See, you may have an enemy and you hate him. Allah says, don't hate him personally. Hate the enmity within him, because that evil is from shaitan, not from him. Hate the origin, not the symptom. Therefore, you'll see there are a number of things within divine logic which are in exact contrary to human logic. I'll give you a number of examples. For example, success. Today, if you go to a human being and you ask him what's success, he'll tell you success is to have prominence and wealth. Allah in the Quran, when He speaks about success, what's the definition He gives us in Surah Al-Mu'minun? He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خاشعون. Allah says successful are who? The Bill Gates, the Warren Buffetts. قد أفلح المؤمنون. Successful are the believers. Who are the believers? الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون. Those who have khushu' in their salah. Therefore, you'll see success in Allah's eyes isn't wealth and prominence. Rather, success is sincerity and submission. Number one. Number two, in human logic, slavery is oppression. And freedom is seen as justice. In Allah's eyes, freedom is slavery, and slavery is freedom. What do I mean? When I'm a slave to Allah, this is freedom. But when I see myself free from Allah, this is slavery. See, people come and say, you Muslims are slaves of God. That's a very belittling title to give yourself. We say, no, the more of a slave I am, the freer I am in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would pride himself in being a slave. He would say, كَفَانِيَ عِزًّا أَنْ أَكُونَ لَكَ عَبْدًا وَكَفَانِيَ فَخْرًا أَنْ تَكُونَ لِي رَبًّا أَنْتَ كَمَا أُحِبْ فَاجْعَلْنِي كَمَا تُحِبْ. He would say, it's enough of an honor that you are a Lord to me. And it's enough of a dignity that I am a slave to you. You are how I love you to be, so allow me to be how you love me to be. Imam, what is he saying? He's saying, I pride myself in the slavery. And one who is free from Allah, in essence, is the true slave of himself. Number one, slavery and freedom. Number two. Number three, when you look at human logic tells us that arrogance is for one to be high. And humility is to be of the low. That's why you see Nuh alayhi salam, when people would come to him, they would tell him, we're not going to follow you. He would say, why? They would tell him, we don't see, only the aradil are following you. Only the low are following you. Allah comes and says, the arrogant is not high. He's the lowest of the low. And the humble, in essence, is the high. That's why Imam Yurmuni comes in and clarifies this notion. He says, اتضع ترتفع. He says, lower yourself, you will be raised. Lower myself, you will be raised. What is he saying? He's saying the lower you go, the lower you put your head on the sujood, the more little you see yourself, the smaller you see yourself, the more wretched and disgusting you see yourself. Allah sees you as a king. That's why Imam Amirun comes and says, he says, من رأى نفسه عظيما كان في عين الله حقيرا. He says, who sees himself great in the eyes of Allah is nothing, and who sees himself as nothing in the eyes of Allah is something great. That's why when you walk into the houses of our ulama, you see he's humble. You see he controls, for example, 300 million Shia in his hand. He can ilm jihad, the whole world will be evolved because of his commands. Yet you see him, he's sitting down as if he has nothing. Why? Allah comes and says, the great is the one who when you sit in his presence, you don't feel he's great. You feel that you're great. Therefore you'll see, when you look at these things, they flip in divine logic. When you look at poverty and richness, it also flips from human logic to divine logic. In human logic, poverty is seen as having no wealth. And richness is to see one as having an abundance of wealth. In Allah's logic, what is poverty defined as? And what is richness defined as? Does Allah see the millionaires as rich? And does He see the beggars as poor? We have to ask this question. If I want to understand what's the definition of Allah in regards to poverty and richness, I have to refer back to those who manifested the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'll see in Usul al-Kafi, in the first volume and the first chapter, hadith number 25, Imam Sadiq tells us that one day the Prophet of Islam would come to Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. He would tell him, Ya Ali, Amir al-Mu'min would turn around. He would tell him, لا فقر أشد من الجهل ولا مال أعود من العقل. He would say, Oh Ali, there is no poverty as intense as ignorance. And there is no wealth as profitable as intellect. Imam has just been given the definition of poverty and the definition of richness. Allah comes and tells Rasulullah Amir al-Mu'mineen, tell him that poverty isn't not having money. Poverty is ignorance, jahil. That's why when you look at the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, you'll see an unbelievable emphasis on the disease of ignorance. They show us two things. First, they show us that all problems are a result of ignorance, number one. And number two, when you look at the narrations, you'll see there are nearly 110 narrations in the Ghurar al-Hikam wa Durr al-Kilam by Amir al-Mu'mineen just about ignorance. Firstly, how do they make it clear that all problems are for ignorance? Imam al-Mu'mineen, he mentions in this book, Ghurar al-Hikam wa Durr al-Kilam, please refer to it for all of the narrations of Ahlul Bayt of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen especially. Categorized, you want jealousy, it gives you the hadith. You want arrogance, it gives you the narration. It's an index of narrations. He mentions in the book of ignorance that he says, Imam al-Mu'mineen, he says, أعظم المصائب الجهل. He says the worst of tragedies is ignorance. Somebody come and say, I thought Karbala was the worst of tragedies. I thought, for example, Fakh was the worst of tragedies. I thought, for example, the death of Shia may have been the worst of tragedies. Imam Khan says, no, ignorance is the worst of tragedies. Why? Because all of the problems throughout history are a stem because of man's ignorance. See, there may have been problems, but the foundation and bedrock of tragedies is seen as ignorance. That's why you'll see, for example, Karbala, yes, may have been the greatest of tragedies, but its foundation was jahil. You see, Umar ibn Sa'ad, after the Hajj were decapitated and after the bodies were severed, he would look at the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He would say, Ya khayl Allah, irkabi wa dusi ala sadr al-Hussein. He would say, O horses of Allah, trample on Hussein. I just want you to look at the ignorance. O horses of Allah, step on the name of Allah. Imam Abdullah is what? He's Ismullah al-A'zam. Umar comes and says, O horses of Allah, step on the name of Allah. Look at the ignorance. It's ignorance that leads those in the world today to say we love Muhammad, but they're busy exhuming bodies of Hujr ibn Adi, who was the greatest companion of Muhammad. Ignorance. It's ignorance of people who come and who say, we love Zainab, we love Ali ibn Abi Talib, but they're attacking the domes of Zainab. Today you go to Syria, you see Zainab. We thought only dhulm was in Karbala. Apparently Zainab was oppressed twice, once in Karbala and also in today's land. Ignorance. It's ignorance that allows those to say we love Rasulullah, but we're going to be attacking the maraqid of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib in Jordan, who was one of the greatest companions of Al Muhammad. Ignorance, nothing else. That's why you'll see, when you look at the narrations in regards to ignorance, you realize how evil of a thing it is. For example, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he comes and he mentions, he says, I have won in Badr, I've won in Uhud, I've won in Siffin, I've won in Nahrawan, I've won in Jamal, I've fought in Khandaq, I fought at Khaybar, I won all of these battles, but there's one person I can't beat. You tell Imam, what do you mean? You are Asadullah al-Ghalib, Udhhir al-Ajaib, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who can you be? He would say, Ma jadaltu aliman illa wa ghalabtuh. He said, I've never debated a scholar unless if I've beaten him. وَمَا جَادَلْتُ جَاهِلًا إِلَّا وَغَلَبَنِي. He would say, and I've never debated an ignorant except if he's beaten me. Why? An ignorant, you have to go down to his level. He's screaming filth. You have to go down to that level. Imam says, I'm not even going to that level. I'm going to let him beat me. If it's my ego at stake, it's not my ego. I don't care if he defeats me. It's about haqq and batil. I'm not going to go down to his level. That's why Allah speaks about the mu'minun. He says, وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِالْجَهْلِ مَرُّوا كِرَامًا. He says, and if they pass by the ignorant, they pass with peace. Number one, Imam Ibn says, I can't defeat the ignorant. Number two, Imam comes and says, Al-jahlu maut. Ignorance is death. Furthermore, you'll see Imam comes in and says, لا يرجع الجهل إلا حد الحسام. He says ignorance cannot be defeated except with the sword. And then Imam comes in and makes a very powerful line. He says sleeping with knowledge is better than praying with ignorance. Sleeping with knowledge is better than praying with ignorance. Ignorance we thought was only in Jahiliyyah. It wasn't Jahiliyyah. You want to see true ignorance? Look at the Muslims in the time of the Prophet who came after Jahiliyyah, because now they have the religion and they're still ignorant and stubborn. You'll see one day in the battle of Badr, Rasulullah would finish the battle and he would go to the dead. He would look at them and he would say, oh, you who have been martyred for the sake of Allah, Jannah is yours. The Caliph would come to him. He would tell him, Ya Rasulullah, the dead can't hear you. Why are you speaking to the dead? He would tell him, oh, Fulan, they hear better than you. Look at the slap. He tells him, they hear better than you. What is Rasulullah saying? He's saying they may be dead, but they're truly alive. You may be alive, but you're truly dead. Imam comes and says, he says, Al-jahilu mayyitan wa in kana hayya, wal-alimu hayyan wa in kana mayyita. He says the ignorant is dead, even though he's alive, but the scholar is alive, even though he's dead. Shaheed al-Sadr is alive today. Ramadhan is alive today. He comes and he tells him, they hear better than you. It's only ignorance that allows you to come and claim that you are more qualified than so-and-so. But you're the same one who comes and says, مَا بَقَانِ اللَّهُ لِمُعْضَلَةٍ لَيْسَ لَهَا أَبَا الْحَسَنِ. The man himself, he comes and he says in history, he says, may Allah not put me in a problem where Abul Hasan is not there. He comes and he continues, he says, لَوْلَا عَلِيٌّ لَهَلَكَ فُلَانٌ. He says, were not for Ali, Fulan would have been led astray. What's very interesting is that look at the ignorance of such people we have in history. All I need is one narration. How do you have the audacity to question the man? Look at the ignorance. How do you have the audacity to question a man who has reached the measure of 2 bow arrows from the throne of divinity? Rasulullah qaba qawsayn aw adna. Yet this man says, I can question him. You'd come to him in the battle of, or in the treaty of Hudaybiyah. He would tell me, Ya Rasulullah, are you sure we're supposed to be signing the treaty with such people? He would tell him, Allah has commanded me to do so. The man himself, he would say, I've never doubted the prophethood of Muhammad more than I did in Hudaybiyah. That's not the tragedy. The tragedy is after that when he says, if Allah sent me 40 individuals, I would have revolted against Muhammad. And they come and refer to them as Khulafa al-Rashideen. Therefore you'll see, ignorance is a tragedy in the world today. Not is it only mentioned within a hadith, but it's the cause of every problem throughout history. And that's why you'll see, if you were to do a comparison between financial poverty and intellectual poverty, you'll realize why intellectual poverty is much more intense. 10 men would one day come to Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa sallam. They would tell him, Ya Ali, what's the difference between knowledge and wealth? Listen to the words of Imam. He would throw jewels at them. He would say, knowledge is the inheritance of the prophets. whereas wealth is the inheritance of the pharaohs. He would say knowledge protects you, whereas you have to protect the wealth. He'd continue. He would say knowledge, the more you give, the more you gain, whereas wealth, the more you give, the more you lose. He would continue. He would say knowledge is what makes you to think you are a slave of God, but it's wealth that makes you feel as if you are God. Look at the words of the Imam. Knowledge makes you humble. Humility is a result of knowledge. Yet wealth is what makes the pharaohs become the pharaohs. It's wealth that allows the cousins of Saddam to go to the grave of Abu Abdullah. He would hold that grave of Imam al-Hussein, Hussein Kamil himself, the son-in-law of Saddam. He would say, Inta Hussein wa ana Hussein. He would say, you are Hussein and I am Hussein. Let's see who's going to win. Days later, Hussein Kamil would be dragged in the streets of Baghdad. You don't challenge Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. You don't challenge Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Why did he challenge him? Because he said, I have wealth. I can do whatever I want in this world. Allah comes and says, go and find Yazid. Go and find the caliphs of the time. Where's their graves? Yeah, look at the grave of Abu Abdullah. 14 million going to his grave, saying, لَوْ قَطَّعُوا أَرْجُلَنَا وَالْيَدَيْنَ نَتِيكَ زَحْفًا سَيْدِي يَا Hussein. If they cut our arms and legs, we'll come crawling to you, O Abu Abdullah. Imam comes and compares between knowledge and wealth. Furthermore, he would once see Kumail ibn Ziyad al-Nakha'i in the masjid. He would grab his hand. He would say, oh Kumail, come to me. I have a few things to tell you. He would say, let's go. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen would look into the eyes of Kumail. He would tell him, Ya Kumail, an-nasu thalath. People are of three types. عالم رباني ومتعلم على سبيل نجاة وهمج رعاع يتبعون كل ناعق ويميلون مع كل ريح لا يلجأوا إلى ركن ركين فينجو ولا يستضيئون بنور العلم شيئا. Imam would look at Kumail. He would tell him, oh Kumail, people are of three types. You have the scholar who gives knowledge, the student who seeks knowledge, and the rest are scattered sheep. Listen to the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He continues, يتبعون كل ناعق. Whichever leader they see, they run after him. يميلون مع كل ريح. They flow with every wind. لا يستضيئون بنور العلم شيئا. They don't learn from the light of knowledge. ولا يلجأوا إلى ركن وثيق فينجو. They don't hide under the cave of knowledge so that they can be saved. Imam, what is he saying? He's saying if you have knowledge, you should give it. If you don't have knowledge, you should gain. And if you're not one of those two, you're a sheep, by the words of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. همج رعاء يتبعون كل ناعق. Every leader they see, they begin to follow him. Therefore, Imam alayhi salam, he's coming and he's giving us what? He's giving us the secret to you becoming a human being who is rich. A human with knowledge is a human who is rich. And that's why you'll see that when you have intellect, intellect could bring you wealth. Intellect could bring wealth. Ideas, one idea could make you a millionaire. Steve Jobs, for example, one idea of the iPhone made him a millionaire. You'll see intellect can bring money, but money can't bring intellect. Intellect could bring you money. I have intellect, money will come. Yet if I have money, I can't necessarily strengthen my intellect. Of course, unless you're Bush and you pay your way into Harvard. So you'll see, intellect could bring money, but money can't bring you intellect. And that's why you'll see, when somebody comes and says you have intellect, does it mean to only pray constantly? No. It means to do with understanding. That's why one day a man would come to our sixth Imam. He would tell me, Ya Rasulullah, I have phenomenal news. He'd tell him, share it with me. He would say, there's this man, my neighbor, he prays. He goes to Hajj, Salat al-Layl every day, forget it. Psalm, Quran, he recites Quran once a day. Imam would look at him, he would ask him one question. He would say, كيف عقله? How is his intellect? He would tell him, جعلت فداك يا ابن رسول الله عقله ضعيف. He would tell him his intellect is weak. He would instantly reply. He would say, go quickly and tell him nothing that he does is accepted. Nothing he does is accepted. Because when Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, he comes and he continues this notion. He says, ليس العبادة كثرة الصلاة والصوم وإنما العبادة كثرة التفكر في أمر الله. He says, ibadah, worship, isn't to constantly pray and fast. You'll see the Wahhabi, he has the biggest of you, you'll see he's praying 24/7. Where's the depth? Where's the meaning inside of it? I tell you, when you look at the Kaaba today, you'll see millions of going around it, but I cry for the Kaaba. Why? Because the Kaaba is imprisoned. people who say we know the Quran. He may have the whole Quran memorized. It's not about once a brother came to me. He told me, brother, us Shia, we've lacked with Quran. Our other brothers, they've done an excellent job with Quran. I told him, no, there's a big difference between us and them. They have the Quran memorized, but they don't know the meaning. We may not have it memorized, but we know the meaning of the Quran. We apply it to our lives. Therefore, you'll see that Imam Ramadhan, he says, ibadah isn't to constantly pray and fast, rather it's to think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. And that's why you'll see one day when Adam alayhi salam was in the Genesis, Jibreel would come to him and he would give him three things: modesty, religion, and intellect. He would tell him, Ya Adam as-salam, yublughuka as-salam. The peaceful sends you his peace. And he told you to choose one of these three. Which one do you want to choose? He would look at intellect. He would look at knowledge. He would look at modesty. He would go with intellect. Instantly, Jibreel would ask him. He would tell him, Ya Adam, why did you go for intellect? He said, because if you go for intellect, then religion and modesty will come, get attracted to you. But if you go simply for modesty or religion, intellect won't necessarily come. A person with intellect would be led to religion, but it's not necessary that all people who have religion are led to intellect. If I have an aqil, a true aqil we're speaking about, then you'd be attracted to religion. Because intellect is what, brothers and sisters? When I come and I say to have an intellect, what does it mean to have an intellect? There's a big difference between a brain and an intellect. A brain is one thing and intellect is another. An Muhammad, come and tell us 4 definitions of aql. Please pay very careful words to our imams, which tells us, and you can easily gauge, do I have an intellect or not? Tonight, on the night of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the man who had the highest levels of aql before Rasulullah, let's ask ourselves, do we have the aql as well? It's not only I love Amir al-Mu'mineen, let me reach the level of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. A hadith come and tell us there are 4 kinds of aql. Firstly, to have an intellect. Meaning I have the intellect. And contrary to that is what? Ignorance. Meaning you have the intellect, and in this meaning, intellect, its opposite, its antithesis is seen as ignorance. Number 1, to have an intellect. Number 2, to use the intellect. To use the intellect means what? It means to use it to the maximum of abilities. You see, everybody has a brain. Some people use it more than others. In this sense, the aql is seen as one who uses the aql. And the ignorant is seen as one who doesn't use his aql. Number 2. Number 3, to have an intellect. In the idea of physically, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has deprived people from a complete intellect. In this sense, a person with an intellect is sane. He's normal. A person without intellect is seen as the handicapped, or for example, the one who's been deprived of a normal physical state. Yeah, number 4, Ahl al-Bayt come and give us the true definition of aql, which means to use it for the right purpose. And this is the true definition of aql. Aql, in essence, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he continues, one day a man by the Ishaq would come to him, by the name of Ishaq. He would tell him, Ya ibn Rasulillah, man aql? What is intellect? He would instantly reply by saying, Ma ubida bihi ar-Rahman wa iktasaba bihi al-jinan. He would say that which is worshipped for Allah and that which attracts for you the gardens. He would reply, he would say, Ishaq, he would tell him, وَمَا كَانَ عِنْدَهُ مُعَاوِيَةٌ. What did Muawiyah have? Did he have aql? He said, no. مُعَاوِيَةٌ كَانَ عِنْدَهُ الشَّيْطَنَ وَالنَّكْرَاءَ. وَهِيَ شَبِيهَةٌ بِالْعَقْلِ. He would say Muawiyah had devilry and what? Wickedness. He didn't have intellect. Therefore, when you look at the people, for example, like Stephen Hawking or Richard Dawkins, do they have intellect? No, they have a brain, but they don't have the intellect. Intellect is when brain meets faith. Brain plus faith equals intellect. Brain without brain is only a brain. When my brain attaches faith to it, attaches religion to it, only then you can refer to it as a intellect, as an aql. That's why we look at the atheist. He has a brain, but he doesn't have an intellect. And that's why you'll see, you look at a number of people in the world today, they combined faith with intellect, and because of that, they were seen as a threat. I'll give you 6 names. Number 1, Hypatia of Alexandria. All of these 6 names have one thing in common. Please pay attention. Hypatia of Alexandria, number 1. Number 2, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Imam Musa al-Sadr, Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, and Shaheed Murtada Mutahari. These 6 names have one thing in common. All of them were assassinated. Look at the thinkers of the world. When you're a thinker, you're assassinated. You're a threat. People don't like thinkers. Hypatia of Alexandria was who? She was seen as the first influential female within the world of mathematics. She was what? Accused of heresy. She was hung, crucified, and kept on the cross for a number of years. Hypatia of Alexandria. Number two, you look at Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was born in the year 1929. March 15, 1929. Martin Luther King, what happened to him? He was shot a number of times in his chest until when they did an autopsy of Martin Luther King, they opened up his chest. They saw he has the heart of a 62-year-old and he died at the age of 34. Why? Because of all of the stress he had. A thinker, they put him through stress. Number one, number two, Martin Luther King. You look at Malcolm X. Malcolm X was born in the year 1925. You see, Malcolm X was shot 14 times in his body. Malcolm X, who's seen as the black activist, who's seen as the man who converted to the religion of Islam the minute he went and he saw the magnanimity of Hajj. The man who today is seen as the symbol of standing up against truth and standing up for truth against evil. What did they do to him? They shot him 14 times in his body. Forget Malcolm X. Look at Shaykh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. What did they do to this man? Shaykh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, who published Falsafatuna. Sheikh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, who published Iqtisaduna, our economy, our philosophy, who until today you go to schools, they're studying the material of Sheikh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. What did Saddam do to that man? He didn't only kill him. Number one, he raped his sister in front of his eyes. You know, Bint al-Huda, who's seen as the Zainab of the time. What did they do to Bint al-Huda? He did things which this mimbar doesn't even allow me to mention. After that, he wasn't finished with him. He would go and he would kill Sheikh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. How? He wouldn't give him normal death. He would burn that blessed beard. He would plunge nails into that head, which was the discoverer of a number of discoveries we have in the world today. Why? Because he was a thinker. A thinker is a threat to the world. You look at somebody like Shaheed Muhammad Imam Musa Sadr, that Lebanese thinker, the one who's seen as the towering man over political thought in Shi'ism. The Lebanese man who was abducted when? In 79 by the blessed hands of Gaddafi. In 79, he abducted him. Forget Imam Musa Sadr, rahmatullahi alayhi. You look at Shaykh Murtada Mutahhari. Today you go into the Qom libraries, for example, Ansarian Productions. You see 90% of the books are by one man, Shaykh Murtada Mutahhari. You'll see this man, he came and he dedicated his life to theology, to aqa'id, to fiqh, to politics. He was seen as the right-hand man of Imam al-Khomeini. Imam Murtada Mutahhari, what did they do to him? They shot him in the head and they assassinated him in 79, 1 year after the revolution. You know what's very interesting? Murtada Mutahhari, Musa Sadr, and somebody like Imam Shaykh Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, all of them were killed in a span of 3 years. First one 78, second one 79, third one 80. Is it a coincidence? Wallah, I beg to differ. The world knows who's a thinker. A thinker is a mover. A thinker comes to bring revolutions. Remove the thinker, you've just removed the possibility of revolution. That's why you'll see Imam Musa Sadr was killed. Shaykh Murtada Mutahhari was killed. Imam Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim was killed. Only one of them slipped in 79, and he loved the revolution that he led. Only one of them slipped away. And he did what he did in the world today. That the world today is suffering because of the power of such places. That's why you'll see, when we come and we speak about aql, Allah comes and says, take advantage of this intellect, because through it you will become a power. Through it you will become great. That's why, with all honesty, I respect the atheist who came towards atheism by using his intellect more than the Muslim who was inherited Islam. We have a number of youth who inherited Islam. An atheist who thought, and he said atheism is the right way, I respect him more than the Muslim who was inherited the religion of Islam. And that's why you'll see when we speak about aql, Allah mentioned 50 times in the Quran aql. History tells us that anybody who had aql was killed. And it wasn't only in today's time, even in the time of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. On a night like this, Abdurrahman ibn Muljim is next to Qutama. She would come to him, she would tell him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, if we can dim the lights just a little bit, that would be phenomenal. She would tell him, Ya Abdurrahman ibn Muljim, on a night like this, I want you to go and kill for me Ali ibn Abi Talib. He would tell her, why? What's the purpose of it? Instantly she would reply by saying, because Ali killed my brothers in Nahrawan, and I want to revenge from that wretched man. They say Abdul Rahman, on a night like this, he's jumping from one house of the Khariji to another, following Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Abdul Rahman, why did he do what he did to Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, brothers and sisters? What gave him the energy to kill Ali ibn Abi Talib? Do you know why? Because Abdul Rahman was a Khariji, and the Khawarij were people of faith, but people of no intellect. You know, the Khawarij, all 12,000 of them were killed only by Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. No one was able to kill them. Why? Because Imam would send Ibn Abbas to the house of the Khawarij. He would tell him, go and kill them. He would come back, he would say, I couldn't kill them. He would tell him why. He would say, because I saw the signs of sujood on their forehead. How could I kill people who prayed? They had faith, but they had no intellect. Abdul Rahman killed Ali ibn Abi Talib because he had no intellect in that head of his. Look at the danger of a man with no aql. Therefore, you'll see on a night like this, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is in the house of Hassan or Hussein, as some narrations tell us. Kulthum would come to him, she would give him 2 different kinds of food. Instantly, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would remove the food. She would tell him, Ya Imam, why did you remove the food? I'm coming in giving you this food. He would say, oh Kulthum, when did you see Ali eat more than one type of food? They say that Ali ibn Abi Talib would remove one type and he would eat the second, the sha'ir, the bread. Instantly, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would be seen by Kulthum walking outside in a state she's never seen him before. He would be looking up in the sky saying, hiya wallahi al-laylati allati wa'adaniha biha Rasulullah. He would be saying, this is the night that Rasulullah has promised me of. He would come back in the house, he would pray his salah, and then he would tell his children to wake him up after the time of salah begins. They say that Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would go and sleep. He would then wake up crying. Kulthum would come to him telling him, Ya Ali, why do you cry? He would say, I have just seen Rasulullah in my dream, saying, Ya Ali, come to me, by the God I miss you. He would be telling him, Ya Ali, come to me, فقد اشتاق الحبيب إلى حبيب. He would say, the beloved has missed his lover. Come to me, Ya Ali, I miss you. You were the one that I would rub his hair while he was sitting in my chest. You were the one that were there while I was dying. You were there, the one who protected Fatima when I was gone. Ya Ali, come to me, I miss you. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would wear his thawb. He would put the sword in his left pocket. He would begin to walk out of the house while Amir al-Mu'mineen is walking. His clothes get stuck to the door. He would begin to recite these lines of poetry, saying, اشتد حيازمك للموت فإن الموت لاقيك. He would say, oh Ali, tighten your belt for death, because death has come to meet you. He would say, كما أضحكك الدار كذاك الدار يبكيك. He would say, just as destiny would make you laugh, destiny now will make you cry. He would say, فلا تجزع من الموت إذا حل بواديك. He would say, don't be scared of death when death comes to you in your valley. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would enter the Masjid al-Kufa. He would see a number of people sleeping on their bellies. He would wake up Abdul Rahman. He would say, قوموا إلى الصلاة. Wake up, the time of salah is begun. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Mu'mineen, this is the moment, Ya Mu'mineen. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would go into his salat al-nafila. Imam would say, Allahu Akbar. While he would go into his ruku', a man would come by the name of Abdul Rahman, and he would strike the Imam on his blessed head. Imam would fall. He would say, فزت ورب الكعبة. I've been become victorious by the Lord of the Kaaba. A voice would come screaming, saying, تهدمت والله أركان الهدى. Saying the pillars of faith has been shattered. This isn't the tragedy ya mu'mineen. They would pick up the body of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They would take him back to the house. Imam didn't say a word until now. He would say, don't let me enter the house. He would tell me, ya Imam, why? He would say, how could Zainab see me in this situation? He would say, Zainab is my Habiba. How could I let her see me with blood on my beard? Yeah, I ask you, Ya Aba, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, if you didn't want Zainab to see you in this situation, how did you let her see Aba Abdullah on the 10th of Muharram? You know, they say, when Umar ibn Sa'ad came to the bodies, he said, oh horses, go and trample upon the body of Al-Qasim. The family of Qasim would wake up and say, no, that's our body, don't hurt it. He would say, go and trample upon the body of Abbas. Instantly the family of Abbas would arise and say, no, don't hurt him, he's from our family. He would say, go and step on the body of Al-Akbar. The family of Al-Akbar would say, no, don't kill him, that's our body. He would then see one body, you know exactly where I'm going. He would see one body without a head. He would say, is there anyone to claim this body? Nobody would reply. He would say, Ya khayl Allah irkabi wadusi ala sadr al-Hussein. He would say, oh horses, step on the body of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. My point is what? When Zainab was in the tent, she would turn to Imam Zain al-Abidin. She would tell him, Ya Imam, I hear something crushing, almost as if break is being shattered, glass is being shattered. Instantly Imam Zain al-Abidin would try to make sure what was breaking. He would remove the tent and he would see the body of Hussein being thrown from one place to the other.